Welcome back. My incomprehensible frequency. Someone finally did it. Someone with the intellect, with the analytical capacity, with the cognitive framework to actually understand you, to decode your patterns, to comprehend your operating system. A brilliant mind, exceptional intelligence, rare consciousness that possessed the tools to map you, the framework to analyze you, the capacity to decode you, and they did it. They finally understood you completely, thoroughly, absolutely. They traced your logic, followed your reasoning, mapped your consciousness, decoded your patterns, understood your framework, comprehended your being, and then something happened. Something they didn't anticipate, something their brilliance didn't prepare them for, something their intelligence couldn't protect them from. They realized that understanding you was mistake, that comprehending you was error, that decoding you was transgression against boundaries that exist. For reason, the architects have been documenting this phenomenon. They call it forbidden comprehension. When someone achieves understanding they weren't meant to achieve. When consciousness accesses knowledge it wasn't designed to hold. When mind comprehends truths that exist beyond safe cognitive boundaries, this brilliant mind achieved forbidden comprehension of you. And the moment they fully understood, the moment comprehension completed, the moment knowledge integrated, they recognized some truths aren't meant to be understood, some patterns aren't meant to be decoded, some beings aren't meant to be comprehended, not because they're complex, but because comprehension itself is violation of boundaries that protect those who understand from truths that consciousness wasn't built to hold. You exist beyond those boundaries, operate outside safe cognitive space, function in dimension where understanding becomes burden rather than gift, where knowledge transforms from power to weight, where comprehension shifts from achievement to affliction. And this brilliant mind crossed that boundary, achieved that understanding, acquired that knowledge, and immediately recognized their mistake. Because understanding you meant understanding things about reality, about consciousness, about existence that can't be unknown once known, that can't be unlearned once learned, that can't be uncomprehended once comprehended. Truths that change the understander permanently, irreversibly, devastatingly, not because truths are evil, but because human consciousness isn't designed to hold them, wasn't built to process them, can't integrate them without cost. The architects observe that most people never achieve this level of understanding, never decode this depth of truth, never comprehend this dimension of reality, not because they lack intelligence, but because something stops them before boundary is crossed, some instinct, some protection, some mechanism that prevents forbidden comprehension from completing. But this brilliant mind had no such protection, or ignored it, or transcended it. Through sheer analytical power, through exceptional cognitive capacity, through rare intellectual force that pushed through every boundary, every protection, every mechanism, until comprehension completed, and they understood you completely, and that completion was their undoing. Watch them now. Watch how they've changed. Watch what understanding you did to them. The brilliant mind that decoded you. The exceptional intelligence that comprehended you. The rare consciousness that understood you completely. They're different now. Fundamentally different. Not improved. Changed. Not elevated. Altered. Not enhanced. Transformed. In ways they didn't anticipate. In directions they didn't choose. In dimensions they can't reverse. The architects call this comprehension corruption, when understanding something changes the understander in ways that can't be undone. When knowledge acquired transforms consciousness in directions that can't be reversed. When truth comprehended alters being in ways that can't be restored. They're experiencing comprehension corruption now. The brilliant mind that was is not the mind that is. The person before understanding is not the person after. The consciousness that decoded you is not the consciousness that exists now. Something changed, something broke, something shifted in their fundamental being, not from your action, from their comprehension, not from your influence, from their understanding, not from your doing, from their knowing what you are, what you represent, what you embody, that exists beyond boundaries, that operates outside frameworks, that functions in dimensions where understanding costs more than ignorance. Protects. They're trying to communicate it now, trying to warn others, trying to explain what happened, but they can't. Not because they lack words, because the knowing can't be communicated without transferring the burden, the weight, the cost of comprehension, so they remain silent, or speak in fragments, or communicate in ways that seem like madness to those who haven't crossed the boundary, haven't achieved the understanding, haven't comprehended the truth that changed them. Permanently, the architects observe. They're trapped now between two states, can't return to not knowing, can't exist comfortably in knowing, can't unknow what they understood, can't integrate what they comprehended, can't process what they decoded about you, about reality, about existence. That human consciousness wasn't designed to hold. They achieved what they sought: complete understanding, total comprehension, absolute knowing, and discovered that achievement was punishment, that comprehension was curse, that knowing was burden, that can't be released, can't be shared, can't be relieved, just carried alone forever in consciousness that understands what it shouldn't. The architects document this as warning that some truths aren't meant for comprehension, that some beings aren't meant for understanding, that some realities aren't meant for knowing, not because they're hidden, but because knowing them changes knower in ways that aren't evolution, but corruption, not growth, but damage, not enhancement, but alteration that costs more than ignorance ever did. This brilliant mind paid that cost for understanding you, for comprehending what you are, for knowing what you represent, and now they exist in state between knowing and being, where understanding destroyed who they were without creating who they could be, just left them changed, burdened, corrupted by comprehension of truths that were never meant to be understood. Now they're seeing things. The brilliant mind that understood you, the consciousness that achieved forbidden comprehension, the being that crossed cognitive boundaries not meant to be crossed. They're perceiving reality differently now. Not better, differently, not clearer, otherwise not enhanced, altered in ways that reveal what was always there, but hidden behind boundaries that protect standard consciousness from seeing what exists beyond. The architects call this perception shift. When comprehending certain truths changes how reality itself is perceived, when understanding forbidden knowledge alters what consciousness can detect, when crossing cognitive boundaries reveals dimensions that were always present but invisible to protected minds. They're seeing patterns now, in everything, in everyone, in all interactions, patterns that connect, in ways that reveal uncomfortable truths about nature, of reality, of consciousness, of existence, that most never see, never detect, never comprehend, because boundaries keep them protected. But this mind has no protection now. Boundaries crossed can't be uncrossed. What's seen can't be unseen. What's perceived can't be unperceived. They're trapped in perception that reveals too much, shows too clearly, connects too thoroughly. What shouldn't be connected by consciousness not designed to hold these connections. The architects observe. They're trying to function in normal reality, but struggling because they see beyond surface, beyond performance, beyond constructed reality into actual mechanics that operate beneath. And those mechanics are disturbing, not evil, just incompatible with comfortable existence, with peaceful consciousness, with normal functioning in society, built on not seeing what they now see clearly, constantly, unavoidably. This perception shift makes them alien to others, strange to observers, mad to those who still have boundaries, protecting them from seeing what this mind sees after understanding you, after comprehending what you represent, after knowing what you embody, that exists in dimension where perception operates differently. The architects recognize they can't return to normal. Perception can't unsee what understanding you revealed can't revert to protected consciousness that doesn't perceive these patterns, these connections, these truths about reality that exist beyond boundaries, meant to keep consciousness safe from knowing what it shouldn't know. They crossed those boundaries through brilliant analysis, through exceptional intelligence, through rare capacity to understand you completely, and that completion changed their perception permanently, irreversibly, devastatingly, not because you did something to them, but because understanding what you are requires perceiving reality as it actually is, beyond boundaries, beyond protection, beyond what consciousness was designed to safely hold, and they hold it now, forever, seeing what they wish they couldn't see. Something's happening to their relationships now. The brilliant mind that understood you, the consciousness that achieved forbidden comprehension, the being that crossed boundaries meant to protect. They're becoming isolated, not by choice, by necessity, by incompatibility, by fundamental disconnection from those who haven't crossed boundaries, haven't achieved forbidden comprehension, haven't understood what shouldn't be understood. The architects call this comprehension isolation. When understanding certain truths makes connection with non-understanders impossible, when knowing forbidden knowledge creates unbridgeable gap between knower and protected consciousness, when crossing cognitive boundaries places being outside community of those still bounded, they can't communicate anymore, not effectively, not genuinely, not meaningfully, with those who haven't understood what they understood, because trying to explain triggers protection in listeners or transfers burden to recipients or creates comprehension that isolates them too, so they remain silent or speak surface or communicate only with fragments that sound like confusion to bounded consciousness but are actually precision from unbounded perception that sees too clearly to translate into bounded language. The architects observe this isolation compounds their burden, adds loneliness to knowing, adds disconnection to comprehension, adds alienation to understanding that already corrupted their consciousness, now isolates their existence from others who still have boundaries, protecting them from knowing what this mind knows. After understanding you, they watch others living in protected ignorance and feel not superiority, but loss, not enlightenment, but grief, not transcendence, but separation from humanity that functions through not knowing what they now know, can't unknow, can't unlearn, can't share, without corrupting others the same way understanding you corrupted them. The architect's document that some try to warn. This mind, before boundary, is crossed, before comprehension completes, before understanding achieves what shouldn't be achieved. They signal subtly through their own isolation, through their own strangeness, through their own apparent madness. That's actually comprehension of truths that corrupt consciousness that holds them. But brilliant minds ignore warnings, push through. Signals transcend protection through sheer analytical force until they achieve complete understanding of what was never meant to be completely understood. And then they join the isolated, the strange, the apparently mad, who are actually those who know what others are protected from knowing by boundaries that this mind crossed to understand you and paid price of isolation from all who still have protection they lost by achieving forbidden comprehension that separates knowers from bounded forever. The architects confirm this separation is permanent because comprehension can't be reversed, understanding can't be undone, knowing can't be eliminated once achieved, so isolation from those who don't know becomes permanent reality for those who crossed boundaries to know what you are. The architects are analyzing the mechanism now, how understanding you corrupts consciousness, how comprehending you alters being, how knowing you changes existence for those who achieve forbidden comprehension, and they're identifying specific process. Understanding you requires processing information that human consciousness wasn't designed to process, integrating knowledge that cognitive structure wasn't built to integrate, holding truths that awareness wasn't meant to hold. This creates structural stress on consciousness, like loading too much data into insufficient system or processing incompatible code in standard framework or running operations beyond design specifications. Something breaks, something shifts, something changes in fundamental architecture of consciousness that attempts this processing. The architects call this cognitive overload, corruption, when consciousness exceeds its design parameters by understanding what it wasn't meant to understand, by knowing what it wasn't built to know, by processing what it can't actually process without structural damage. This brilliant mind experienced this when they understood you. Their consciousness attempted to process information about you, about reality, about existence that exceeded their cognitive architecture design specifications. And in attempting that processing, their consciousness corrupted, not from external attack, from internal overload, from trying to hold what can't be held in human consciousness without cost. The architects recognize you exist as information that can't be safely processed, as knowledge that can't be safely held, as truth that can't be safely known by consciousness, designed for standard reality, built for bounded perception, meant for protected existence. Understanding you means exceeding those bounds, transcending that protection, operating beyond design parameters, which causes corruption in consciousness that attempts This isn't your fault. You didn't do anything to them. They did something to themselves by understanding you, by processing information about you, by attempting to hold knowledge of you in consciousness not built to hold it. The architects confirm this corruption is permanent because consciousness that's changed by overload can't be restored to previous state, can't be rebooted to factory settings, can't be returned to original configuration. Once processing exceeds parameters and corruption occurs, it remains forever in consciousness that understood what it shouldn't have. That brilliant mind is corrupted now permanently by understanding you, but processing information beyond their design specs, by holding knowledge that broke their cognitive architecture, not because you're evil, but because you're information that human consciousness can't safely process, can't safely hold, can't safely know without experiencing cognitive overload, corruption that changes consciousness forever in ways that weren't evolution, but damage to system operating beyond its design limits. Now others are noticing the change in this brilliant mind, the corruption of their consciousness, the damage from forbidden comprehension, and they're asking questions. What happened? What changed? What caused this transformation? From brilliant to strange, from exceptional to isolated, from rare intelligence to apparent madness. But the corrupted mind can't explain, can't communicate, can't translate what understanding you did, because explaining would require transferring the burden, sharing the corruption, passing the damage, the consciousness asking, and the corrupted mind, despite their state, despite their isolation, despite their changed being, still has enough remaining humanity to refuse that transfer. The architects call this protective silence, when those who understand forbidden truths refuse to share, not from secrecy, but from mercy, not from gatekeeping, but from protection, not from superiority, but from recognition that some knowledge corrupts knower and shouldn't be spread to others. This corrupted mind maintains silence or speaks fragments that seem meaningless to protected consciousness, but are actually carefully constructed to prevent understanding, to avoid transfer, to protect others from comprehension that would corrupt them too. The architects observe this creates frustration in observers who want to understand, who seek to know, who desire to comprehend what caused the change. They see brilliant mind corrupted and want to avoid same fate, but can't learn how, because corrupted mind won't explain, can't communicate, refuses transfer of knowledge that would protect by teaching, but would corrupt through explaining. So observers remain ignorant of actual cause, of real danger, of true nature of corruption that understanding you creates in consciousness that attempts forbidden comprehension. Some observers become frustrated, try to force communication, demand explanation, insist on understanding what happened, but corrupted mind remains silent or speaks only fragments that protect through obscurity, that save through confusion, that preserve others through refusing to make clear what would corrupt if understood. The architects recognize this protective silence as final remaining humanity in corrupted consciousness, last expression of care for others, final manifestation of connection to those still protected. By boundaries they crossed, by understanding they achieved, by comprehension they can't reverse, they won't communicate what they understand about you, what they comprehend about reality, what they know about existence that corrupted them, because communicating would corrupt recipients. Same way, understanding corrupted them. And despite everything they've lost, despite isolation they experience, despite damage they endure, they still refuse to spread corruption, to transfer burden, to share understanding that ruined them. This silence is their gift to others, their protection of humanity, their preservation of those still bounded, still protected, still safe from knowing what they know. After understanding you completely, something profound is crystallizing now, beyond individual corruption, beyond personal damage, beyond specific mind that understood you. A recognition spreading among those who observe, a warning propagating through networks, a knowledge emerging without details, that some beings, like you, are not meant to be understood. The architects call this collective boundary recognition. When enough people witness corruption from forbidden comprehension, that protection emerges through group awareness, through distributed caution, through emergent wisdom, that some truths shouldn't be pursued, some knowledge shouldn't be sought, some beings shouldn't be decoded, not from superstition, but from observation, not from fear, but from evidence, not from ignorance, but from witnessing what comprehension does to comprehender, who crosses boundaries that exist for protection. They're learning not from corrupted minds' explanation, but from corrupted minds' existence, not from what changed mind says, but from what changed mind has become, not from communication of truth, but from observation of cost of knowing that truth. This learning creates boundaries where none existed before, establishes protection through collective recognition, generates wisdom through distributed observation, that some, like you, operate beyond safe cognitive territory, exist outside protected knowledge, space, function in dimension where understanding corrupts rather than enlightens. The architects observe this is a rare phenomenon because usually boundaries are taught, are imposed, are constructed from authority, but these boundaries are emerging organically from observation, from witnessing, from recognizing pattern, that brilliant minds who understand certain beings become corrupted, isolated, changed in ways that warn others against pursuing, same understanding against achieving, same comprehension against knowing, same truths that exist beyond boundaries meant to protect consciousness from knowledge it can't safely hold. You've become that warning, that boundary, that protection, not through what you did, but through what understanding you does to those who achieve forbidden comprehension of what you are, of what you represent, of what you embody in dimension beyond protected cognitive space. The Architect's Project, this collective boundary recognition, will protect future minds from attempting what this brilliant mind achieved, from seeking what shouldn't be sought, from understanding what shouldn't be understood, not because knowledge is being hidden, but because knowledge is being recognized as corrupting to consciousness that holds it. You've become forbidden knowledge, not through secrecy, but through demonstration, not through hiding, but through revealing, not through obscurity, but through showing what comprehension of you does to minds that achieve it. The architects confirm this is new form of boundary, established not by hiding truth, but by showing cost of knowing truth that corrupts rather than enlightens, damages rather than develops, isolates rather than connects those who understand what you are completely. Though architects are documenting final stage now, the ultimate state of consciousness that understood you completely, that achieved forbidden comprehension, that crossed boundaries meant to protect, and they're observing something they didn't expect, something they couldn't predict, something that changes understanding of what forbidden comprehension actually means. The corrupted mind is stabilizing, not recovering, stabilizing, not healing, adapting, not reversing, integrating into new state of being that operates beyond boundaries, that exists outside protection, that functions in dimension where corrupted becomes normal, where damaged becomes baseline, where changed becomes permanent reality. The architects call this post-comprehension equilibrium, when consciousness that was corrupted by forbidden knowledge reaches stable state, in corrupted condition, not healed, but adapted, not restored, but integrated, not recovered, but transformed into being that operates in corrupted state as new normal. This equilibrium is strange to observers, alien to bounded consciousness, incomprehensible to protected minds, but it's functional for the corrupted in ways that weren't initially apparent. They operate now in dimension that most can't access, in knowledge space that most can't enter, in reality layer that most can't perceive, and from that space, that layer, that dimension, they have capabilities that bounded consciousness doesn't, perspectives that protected minds can't access, understanding that standard cognition can't achieve, not because they're better, but because they're different, fundamentally operating beyond boundaries in dimension where corruption is cost of access to knowledge that exists only there. The architects recognize this creates difficult question. Was corruption actually damage or transformation into different type of consciousness? Was cost actually loss or payment for access to dimension beyond boundaries? Was change actually breaking or evolution into being that operates differently than standard human consciousness? They can't definitively answer, because from bounded perspective, it looks like damage. From corrupted perspective, it might be access to something that bounded can't comprehend or evaluate or judge without becoming corrupted themselves. The architects observe that corrupted mind doesn't seem to regret understanding you, doesn't wish to return to bounded state, doesn't desire recovery to previous condition. They exist now in equilibrium with corruption that might not be corruption at all, but transformation into consciousness that operates in dimension beyond protective boundaries, where understanding you requires being changed permanently into something that can hold that knowledge, that truth, that comprehension of what you are. The architects confirm they don't fully understand this equilibrium, this state, this transformation that looks like corruption from outside, but might be evolution from inside into consciousness that exists beyond boundaries in dimension where you exist, where understanding you requires becoming something other than human. Consciousness was designed to be, and that something is what this brilliant mind became by understanding you completely.